Long before we learn how to think, we learn how to feel. The child, in its quiet sensitivity, is constantly drawing conclusions about life, whether the world is safe, whether love is stable, whether one's own needs are welcome or a burden. These early impressions do not remain in the past. They form the emotional blueprint of the personality. They shape how we attach, how we defend ourselves, and how we interpret the smallest signals of acceptance or rejection. What the mind later forgets, the psyche remembers. A tone of voice, an absence of warmth, a moment of abandonment can become an inner rule about who we are and what we may expect from others. And so the adult often reacts not to the present situation, but to an ancient emotional memory that still lives within. To understand the inner child is therefore not sentimentality, it is psychological realism. It is the recognition that beneath our sophisticated adult identity stands a much younger self, still seeking safety, still asking whether it is allowed to exist without conditions. When we begin to see this, we stop judging our reactions and start listening to their origin. For in meeting the child within with awareness, we lay the foundation for all genuine healing. Heal the blueprint, and you begin to redesign your life. What is not healed does not disappear, it waits. The psyche has a remarkable fidelity to its earliest wounds, and it repeats them with almost ritual precision. The child who learned that love was uncertain may grow into the adult who clings, tests, or withdraws. The one who felt unseen may become overly accommodating or endlessly hungry for recognition. These are not flaws of character, they are the aftershocks of adaptation. At one time, such patterns were intelligent strategies for survival, ways of securing a fragile sense of safety or belonging. But when carried into adulthood, they become invisible scripts that govern our choices, drawing us again and again into the same emotional dramas. We call this fate or bad luck, or just the way I am. Yet psychologically, it is the past insisting on resolution. The repetition is not punishment, it is an invitation. Life presents us with familiar pains not to torment us, but to make us conscious of what remains unfinished within. When we recognize the pattern, we loosen its grip. When we understand its origin, we recover our freedom. What you bring into awareness, you no longer have to live out blindly. And in that moment, the cycle can finally end. In order to belong, the child often learns to become someone else. Sensitivity may be hidden behind toughness, spontaneity behind obedience, need behind competence. Slowly, a split forms between what is felt and what is shown, between the true self and the adapted self. This adaptation is not deception. It is a creative act of survival. The psyche shapes a mask that will be accepted by the environment, even if it means abandoning parts of its own nature. Yet what is disowned does not vanish. It sinks into the unconscious and waits, expressing itself later as emptiness, fatigue, or a vague sense of living a life that is not fully one's own. Many adults suffer not because they are broken, but because they have become too good at being who they were needed to be. They confuse the role with the identity, the armor with the body beneath it. Psychological maturity begins when we dare to ask a dangerous question: which parts of me are authentic, and which were merely protective? To reclaim the true self is not to reject the past, but to release the necessity of the mask. When you no longer live from adaptation, you begin to live from essence. And that is the first taste of inner freedom. If the wound was formed in relationship, it must also be healed in relationship. And the most decisive relationship is the one we have with ourselves. Reparenting the psyche means that the adult consciousness assumes the role that was once missing, the role of protection, understanding, and emotional containment. It is the ability to say to the frightened part within, "You are safe now, and your feelings make sense." This is not indulgence. It is discipline of the highest order. It requires boundaries where there was once intrusion, patience where there was once neglect, and firmness where there was once chaos. To reparent oneself is to replace inner criticism with inner authority, and emotional abandonment with steady presence. Gradually, the nervous system learns a new language, one in which urgency gives way to trust, and self-rejection to self-respect. What was once sought compulsively from others, validation, reassurance, permission to exist, can now be given from within. In this way, the psyche becomes whole, no longer split between a wounded child and a demanding world. The adult self stands as a bridge, capable of holding vulnerability without collapsing into it. When you become the parent your inner child always needed, you no longer look to the past for rescue. You become it. When pain is denied, it hardens. When it is met, it transforms. The psyche does not ask us to erase our wounds, but to integrate them. In doing so, what once felt like weakness reveals itself as a source of depth. The child who learned to be vigilant becomes the adult with refined intuition. The one who endured loneliness often develops a profound capacity for understanding the inner world of others. Suffering, when consciously held, matures into insight. This is the alchemical process of the soul, the descent into darkness that yields not despair, but meaning. To face the inner child's pain is to reclaim the energy that was bound in defense and fear. That energy, once liberated, becomes creativity, empathy, and a quiet strength that does not need to prove itself. We discover that our sensitivity is not a flaw, but a finely tuned instrument, and that our scars are not signs of damage, but of survival. In this integration, the personality grows more whole, less divided against itself. We are no longer fighting our history, we are using it. And when the wound becomes wisdom, the past is no longer a chain. It becomes a foundation from which a deeper, more compassionate life can be built. True healing does not mean returning to childhood, but retrieving from it what was left behind: vitality, trust, and the capacity to feel fully alive. When the inner child is no longer exiled, the psyche moves toward wholeness. The fragments of the self, once divided by fear and adaptation, begin to form a coherent inner unity. This is what Jung called individuation. The coming together of all that we are, light and shadow, strength and vulnerability, into a single, integrated life. Innocence is then no longer naivete, but clarity. Power is no longer domination, but self-possession. From this inner reconciliation arises a calm that is not indifference, and a confidence that is not defense. Relationships change, because we are no longer seeking parents in partners, nor validation in applause, but meeting others from a place of inner sufficiency. The world itself feels different, because it is no longer filtered through the anxious eyes of an unprotected child, but through the steady gaze of an adult who knows how to care for what is fragile within. To heal the inner child is therefore to reclaim the right to be fully present in one's own life. When the past is integrated rather than denied, the future opens. And in that integration, you do not merely survive, you finally begin to live.